Okay, children, we thought we would end the day with having a story, and I've chosen The Secret Garden for two reasons. It is my favourite children's story, and they're making a new film of The Secret Garden, which you'll be able to go and see in the cinema in a few weeks' time or on video, so I thought we'd choose that. So it's about a little girl who begins off life in India, and something happens to her family and she has to move to Yorkshire. When Mary Lennox was sent to Misselthwaite Manor to live with her uncle, everybody said she was the most disagreeable looking child ever seen. It was true too. Her hair was yellow and her face was yellow because she was been born in India and always been ill in one way or another. Her father had held a position under the English government, and her mother had been a great beauty who only cared to go to parties. She had not wanted a little girl at all, and when Mary was born, she was handed over to the care of an ayah, or a servant, to keep the sickly, fretful thing out of the way. One hot morning when she was 9 years old, she awakened feeling cross, and she became crosser still when she saw that the servant who stood by her bedside was not her ayah. "Send my ayah to me." The woman looked frightened, but only stammered that the ayah could not come. And when Mary threw herself into a passion, she looked only more frightened and repeated that it was not possible for the ayah to come to see Missy Sahib. The cholera had broken out in its most fatal form. There was a panic on every side, and during the confusion, Mary hid herself in the nursery and was forgotten. She could scarcely keep her eyes open, and she lay down on her bed and knew nothing more for a long time. When she awakened, she lay and stared at the wall. The house was perfectly still. The next minute she heard footsteps in the compound and then on the veranda. They were men's footsteps. Mary was standing in the middle of the nursery when they opened the door. "Mercy on us, who is she?" "I am Mary Lennox. Why does nobody come?" "Poor little kid," he said. "There's nobody left to come." Mary was very young and she'd always been taken care of. She supposed she always would be. She knew that she was now going to go and she was not going to stay at the English clergyman's house where she was taken at first. The clergyman had 5 children, nearly all the same age. By the second day, they'd given her a nickname. It was Basil who thought of it. Basil was a little boy with impudent blue eyes and a turned-up nose, and Mary hated him. Basil called Mary Mistress Mary Quite Contrary, and the children would taunt her with a nursery rhyme. "Mistress Mary Quite Contrary, how does your garden grow, with silver bells and cockle shells and marigolds all in a row?" "You're going to be sent home," Basil said to her, "at the end of this week, and we're glad of it." "I'm glad of it too," answered Mary. "She doesn't know where home is," said Basil. "It's England, of course. You're going to your uncle. His name's Mr. Archibald Craven. He lives in a great, big, old house, and no one goes near him. He's so cross, he won't let them." "I don't believe you," said Mary. Mary made the long voyage to England under the care of an officer's wife. She was very much absorbed in her own little boy and girl, and was rather glad to hand the child over to the woman Mr. Archibald Craven sent to meet her in London. The woman was his housekeeper, Mrs. Medlock. She was a stout woman with very red cheeks and sharp black eyes. Mary thought Mrs. Medlock the most disagreeable person she had ever seen, with her common face and her common bonnet. When the next day they set out on their journey to Yorkshire, she walked through the station trying to keep as far away from her as she could, because she did not want to seem to belong to her. Mary sat in her own corner of the railway carriage and looked plain and fretful. Mrs. Medlock had never seen a child who sat so still without doing anything. "Do you know anything about your uncle?" "No," said Mary. I suppose you might as well be told something to prepare you. The house is 600 years old, and it's on the edge of a moor, and there's nearly 100 rooms in it, though most of them are shut up and locked. He's not going to trouble himself about you, that's sure and certain. He never troubles himself about no one. He's got a crooked back, that set him wrong. He was a sour young man till he was married. She was a sweet, pretty thing. Nobody thought she'd marry him, but she did. And when she died—" "Oh, did she die?" Yes, she died, and it made him queerer than ever. Most of the time he goes away, and when he's at Misselthwaite, he shuts himself up in the west wing. There's gardens enough, but when you're in the house, don't go wandering and poking about. I shall not want to go poking about, said sour little Mary. The station was a small one, and nobody but themselves seemed to be getting out of the train. On the road was a smart carriage, and a smart footman helped her in. He shut the door, and they drove off. So how's Mary been described so far in this story? How's she been described? Alicia?
Sour.
She's sour. What do you think that means?
Like, she's not in a good mood.
She's not in a very good mood. Alistair, what do you think it might? She gets very cross and angry.
Not really friendly.
She's not very friendly. If someone's had a servant, an ayah, who's looked after them, what else could you say about them?
They're bossy.
That she is bossy, maybe.
Maybe a bit posh.
She's quite posh. She's probably used to being looked after. She's not used to doing anything for herself. So something's happened in her. She lived in India. She's an English girl living in England. Something happened to the family, so she has to come back to Yorkshire, up in the north of England, to live with her uncle. And what do we know so far about the uncle? What do we know about him?
He has a very big house in the Hollywood.
Okay. Okay, Christina. He's got a really big house. What else do we know about him? Is he a pleasant, friendly chap? What else do we know about him? Is he pleasant and friendly? No, he's sour. He's bad-tempered. So we've got bad-tempered Mary going to live with her bad-tempered uncle. What do you think might happen? Charlie?
Fight.
They might be arguing. Let's find out. At last they stopped before an immensely long house which seemed to ramble round a stone court. A thin old man stood near the manservant who opened the door for them. And then Mary Lennox was led up a broad staircase and down a long corridor and up a short flight of steps until a door opened in a wall, and she found herself in a room with a fire in it and supper on the table.
Alicia's got to go now.
You have to watch the end of the story on YouTube, Alicia. Bye. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
When she opened her eyes in the morning, it was because a young housemaid had come into her room to light the fire. That the more does that like it. Everyone at Misselthwaite spoke in a broad fashion, which Mary found out afterwards was Yorkshire. They would say thou instead of you, but then shorten it to thou and shorten many other words. No, I hate it. It's fairly lovely in the spring and summer when those gorse and broom and heather's in flower. Mary listened to her. The servants in India were not like this. You are a strange servant. Martha sat on her heels and laughed. You wrap up warm and run out to play, said Martha. It'll do you good. Out? Why should I go out on a day like this? Who will go with me? You go by yourself. Our Dickon goes on the moor all by himself and out and plays for hours. That's how he's made friends with Topony and the yak birds as come and eats out of his hands. If thou goes right round that way, thou come to the gardens, she said, pointing to a gate in the wall of shrubbery. One of the gardens is locked up. No one has been in it for 10 years. Why? Asked Mary. Mr. Craven had it shut when his wife died so sudden. He won't let no one go inside. It was her garden. He locked the door and dug a hole and buried the key. Mary turned down the walk, and through the shrubbery gate she found herself in a great garden with wide lawns and trees and evergreens clipped into strange shapes and a large pool with an old grey fountain. But the flower beds were bare and the fountains was not playing. At the end of the path she followed, there seemed to be a long wall with ivy growing over it. There was a green door in the ivy and it stood open. She went through the door and found that it was one of several walled gardens which seemed to open into one another. Presently, an old man with a spade over his shoulder walked through the door. He looked startled when he saw Mary. He had a surly old face and didn't seem at all pleased to see her. What is this place? She asked. One of kitchen gardens. What is that? Said Mary, pointing through the other green door. Another of them. That's another on the other side of the wall, and there's the orchard, and on the other side of that. Can I go in them? If thou likes. Mary went down the path and through the second green door. But in the second wall there was another green door. It was not open. Perhaps it led into the garden which no one had seen for 10 years. She went to the green door and turned the handle. She hoped the door would not open, but she did, and she found herself in the orchard. There were walls all around it. There were walls all around it also, but there was no green doors anywhere. She could see the tops of trees above the wall, and when she stood still, she saw a bird with a bright red breast sitting on the topmost branch of one of them, and suddenly he burst into winter song. She stopped and listened, and the bright-breasted little bird brought a look into her sour little face, which was almost a smile. Why had Mr. Archibald Craven buried the key? If he'd liked his wife so much, why did he hate her garden? If she should ever see him, she knew that she would not like him, and he would not like her. People never like me, and I never like them, she thought. She thought of the robin. I believe that tree was in the secret garden. There was a wall round it and no door. She walked back into the first kitchen garden and found the old man digging. There was no door there into the other garden. What garden? He said. The one on the other side of the wall, answered Mistress Mary. There are trees there. A bird with a red breast was sitting on one of them, and he sang. To her surprise, the surly old weather-beaten face actually changed its expression. A slow smile spread over it. He began to whistle, a low, soft whistle. Almost the next moment she heard a soft little rushing flight through the air. It was the bird with the red breast, and he alighted quite near to the gardener's foot. What has that been, thou cheeky little beggar, he said. The bird put his tiny head on one side and looked up at him with his soft bright eye. He hopped about and pecked the earth briskly. It actually gave Mary a queer feeling in her heart. He was so pretty and cheerful. Will he always come when you call him? Aye, he will. I've known him ever since he was a fledgling. What kind of bird is he? Doesn't thou know? He's a robin redbreast. She went a step nearer to the robin and looked at him very hard. I'm lonely, she said. The old gardener pushed his hat back on his head. What is your name? Mary inquired. Ben Weatherstaff. I'm lonely myself, except when he's the only little friend I've got. Suddenly, a clear rippling sound broke out near her and she turned round. Ben Weatherstaff laughed. Damn me if he hasn't taken a fancy to thee. To me, said Mary, and she moved towards the little tree softly and looked up. Would you make friends with me? Why, thou, said that, almost like Dickon talks to his wild things on the moor. Do you know Dickon? Mary asked. Everybody knows him. I'll warrant the foxes show him where their cubs lies, and the skylarks don't hide their nests from him. Mary would have liked to ask some more questions, but just at that moment the robin gave a little shake of his wings and he flew away. He has flown into the garden where there is no door. He lives there. Where is the green door? There must be a door somewhere. There was 10 years ago, but there isn't now. No door? There must be. No one as anyone can find it. And he stopped digging and walked off. Okay, so we'll find out whether he manages to find the door and whether she actually gets into the garden tomorrow. So Alicia, can you